here at HAUSER WIRTH on West 18th Street. We're going to go in and listen to a discussion about Lee Lozano drawings and paintings, and I'm going to run through and maybe catch a look at some of these paintings. I think they're from the late 60s.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining. We have been so pleased to have the Lee Lozano exhibition up for the summer. It has been a great experience to see her drawings and paintings interact in this room. As the show is soon ending, we are glad to present this panel discussion. And it's my honor to introduce our panelists, Jacqueline Humphreys, Jutta Kötter, and Bob Nickas. Jacqueline Humphreys is an American artist living and working in New York City. Her work is currently the subject of a solo exhibition at the Carnegie Museum of Art, which will travel to the Contemporary Art Center, New Orleans in November. She has worked in the permanent collections of several major institutions, including MoMA, the Whitney, SF MoMA, and the Tate, and so to name a few. Jutta Kötter is a German-American artist based in New York City and Berlin. Her painting project has incorporated elements of various performative acts, music, textural delivery, studies in the history of painting, and various collective practices. She has had major solo exhibition at the Moderna Museum in Stockholm, Van Appe Museum, and presented works at many institutions, including MoMA and PS1, ICA Philadelphia, and MoMA Los Angeles. Bob Nickas is a critic and independent curator based in New York who has organized more than 90 exhibitions since 1984. He served as a curatorial advisor at PS1 MoMA between 2004 and 2007, where his exhibitions included Lee Lozano, Drawn from Life, and major exhibitions by Christopher Wool, Miriam Gagny, Stephen Shore, and Wolfgang Tillmans. His books include Painting Abstraction, Theft is Vision, and Life Free or Die, collected writings 1985 to 1999. He's also one of the authors of No Problem, Cologne in New York 1984 to 1989. Two new collections of his writing, The Depth of Corrections and Complaint Depth, are forthcoming this fall from Karma. 30 by 130 survey of his books, catalogs, scenes, editions, and records produced over the past 30 years will be presented at White Columns in November. Thank you, Jacqueline, Jutta, and Bob, and to participate in this discussion, and I will pass it now to them. Thank you for welcoming me.
Thanks, Barbara. I have a title for this evening's conversation, which is a play on Lee Lozano's famous statement, "Win first, don't last. Win last, don't care." The title is "Paint first, don't last. Paint last, don't care." With this, I have a number of questions in mind, which could take the conversation in different directions. Firstly, the 1960s, 70s, from which Lozano emerged and subsequently disappeared, represents the idea that everything is allowed. And yet, somehow, painting in that time was not. Keeping in mind that so many of the conceptual process and earth artists and many film and video makers and performance artists had begun their lives in art as painters, as studio artists. Painting was, by artists, critics, and curators, looked down upon. It was retrograde, it was not advanced, it was on the market. The post-studio artist was the vanguard. One question I have is, so that's the 60s, 70s. Can artists today paint or unpaint and not care? But to be careless doesn't imply indifference. It suggests a particular engagement to consciously do as you please. To be free. This was also an idea behind the post-studio 60s and 70s, part and parcel of the politics and liberation of that time. It's going to be over in a minute. To ask painters to ask of painters today, what is their investment, is to raise a parallel question. In a world that emphasizes winning and losing to such an extent, far beyond the criticism of art and its markets and of museums in Lozano's time, is painting today equated with winning more so than any other practice? And if Lee Lozano came back as an artist tomorrow, would she stop again? If I asked that question, I think the answer is she would. But would the reasons be different or in any way the same? Freedom is at the heart of it. So I thought to start, that's kind of a lot to put out. But do you, whoever wants to go first, remember the first time you saw Lee Lozano's work, encountered it, and
I saw it first at, maybe I saw it before, but I first when I took real note of it was in David Reed's exhibition uptown of this group of painters who were painting in the 70s, more or less. I forget the name.
High Times, Hard Times.
Thank you. What is it?
High Times, Hard Times.
Hard Times, yeah. There's also an article from 2001 Art Forum, like Katie Siegel, and I think the show is around when Katie Siegel interviews David Reed about Lee Lozano specifically, which is really a great article. But really more, it's just since then it's just been more and more emergent. But it's very possibly, I saw it in the early 80s when I was living in New York, and but maybe not. It seems like perhaps there was no opportunity to see her work as late as 1982.
right.
I have not seen Lee Lozano's work, but I got introduced to it as a concept. As an idea, and in relation to my own painting practice, and I got introduced to it by you in the 90s, and it was not so much about like actually looking at paintings or seeing the paintings or being interested in the objects, but into procedures that would enable any kind of creative acts. And as a female artist in the city of New York, and for me it was one of these interesting and kind of antagonistic propositions about painting and the failure of painting and returns and painting in relation to social scenarios and interactions, and how dependent and interlaced these type of productions and these positions were. So for me, it was a very crucial sort of package, and I would never be able to separate, and I would also refuse to separate a painting, the painting production from her other decisions and other types of output or the dropout of output. So for me, of course, coming here and seeing this is a highly problematic proposition about Lozano. In a way, just compacting it into a package of paintings and drawings. On the other hand, said that I would be interested in a discussion around why are we trying to package things in this way? Why is there obviously is a rediscovery or reevaluation of an artist always necessarily related to a kind of a retro kind of packaging, or is it necessary maybe for a formal analysis or for whatever analysis to make these parts?
But
that is something that is it an entire is it something that needs to be discussed in its entire
Well, there's not one Lee Lozano. Artists have multiple lives if they have long careers, and actually her career isn't that long, but it moves at such a quick pace. It's really, there's a lot of speed to how she moves from, you would say, part one, her earliest period, to tools painting, which is the second period, to, there's a big drawing activity. There's this part, which is made in 3. Then there's very conceptual work, which is 4. And then there's leaving New York and no longer producing art, which is 5.
But I feel like the way it's come, been revived, so to speak, this is sort of the last piece, even though it wasn't the last phase on that progression. Like the first way I ever heard of her was really, hearing about the conceptual pieces, and supposedly, the only artwork of hers that was ever mentioned in obituaries and such were sort of her conceptual pieces, for instance, Not Talking Women piece. She's more notorious for that piece than she is known for painting, really. In that, then perhaps that's equally problematic to sort of take that out of context and package it. But, it's, I think, the vision of art, what artists do, as presented by museums and galleries, is often completely misrepresentation. It tries to take something that seems unified and, that has authority and present it as like, well, this is what artists do, when actually most artists I know are doing many different things at the same time, or in different phases of their career. But, so, this is a classic painting, drawing show, enriched by, the more you know about her, the more enriching it is.
I think when you look at any work of hers, she's such a strong figure that everything she did and everything she stopped doing, it's there, you're aware of it. And even if this is a show that's just a drawing show, obviously every show can't show you the whole breadth of an artist does. But what I come back to is how, and it goes to the opening remarks, in a period when, 60s, 70s, when people stopped making paintings and started doing other things, post-studio things, very conceptual things, people making works that were not physically realized and so on, why is she painting? It's obviously something important to her as a practice. And I think that's also something common to both of you. One of the things that really struck me, there's a drawings book that they have here, and there's a quote from April 1969, and she says, and maybe this goes towards answering that question, I just put out there, why is she painting when she could have done anything? She could have made sculpture, she could have done, any number of things, but there is this painting practice. And she said, painting is the most extreme transformation of homely, ordinary, cheap materials into an extraordinary eye and mind-pleasing, vibrating slab of abstract matter. So I think she was interested in the possibilities of what could be done, because it's 2D work, but she's an artist who's interested in physics, science, math, astronomy, all these things. And then she makes these paintings that kind of defy our idea of how you represent things like light moving through space.
Yeah, I do think that they correspond to most people's expectations of painting at that time, nor this time. And they're not really visual at all. The way the sort of visual cues in the paintings are very few. They do something else. But I think to answer your question, that's yes, she saw possibly everything she wanted to do in painting, but because she seemed to radicalize everything she touched, she would want to paint because people told her not to. I think it's just that simple.
I mean, I would even say that you came out of a period where somehow painting, you weren't supposed to paint. And then out of that came a very interesting group of people who just said, okay, we'll just use painting in different ways, that it became part of a bigger practice that, if you think about the 80s, it was a very different return to painting, especially if I think of you were coming from Cologne, you had Martin Kippenberger, you had Michael Kreber, you had a lot of people who were, Shobin van Heil is here, who were not making works that were somehow,
Yeah, but
allowed.
Yeah, but I do think that's what I mean by certain, developing a certain sort of Haltung or an attitude, what painting is supposed to do for you, or you do with it, with this act of painting, because it is, and I don't know, I can't speculate on how Lea Lozano did her paintings, but from the moves she has made, like from, in retrospect, like from, everything seems to be also this kind of decision, like to push like one particular type of work and her particular desire in interaction with that, like be it like this super tight kind of weird fields that she disappears in here, or be it these aggressive, active, like conversation pieces that are the screws and the tools. Everything is a sort of is like going high intensity and with a certain speed and kind of duration, and also sort of, I wouldn't say carelessness, but a kind of she's not like, she doesn't try to be reliant on anybody or anything. It's like this little, and I think that is some way of like how to make painting at a moment when maybe painting and other people, like isolate it in a way from the discussion and make it your platform, your thing, and just go full force with it, you know, wherever it takes you. And of course you run into walls or but you risk that, and then I think that is sort of her whole thing is a sequence of taking that risk, you know, and so I think that's what is interesting to me about it, like that somebody is in a way almost like maybe knowingly that this can also cause your like
when you look at drawings and you look at drawings where she's imagining, I can make this painting or that, or why don't I try this or do that, you see in the margins that she's actually talking back to herself and saying she's rejecting a lot of her own ideas. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of paintings that only exist in drawings that she never made. It was just, so I think even she understood there was a kind of failure implicit in really trying to go beyond what is, you know, tumble materials, this two-dimensional plane, etc.
I think it was all wrapped up with a very conceptual approach, you know. That was very, like, you know, for instance, the way of paintings, which were the paintings that came after these paintings, the way they proceeded was very sort of measured, very deliberate, as these paintings are. And, you know, essentially, because they're, like, the first one has one way, and then the second one has two, or it proceeds mathematically, and it got to the point where she couldn't physically do the paintings anymore. And so
the last painting.
Conceptually, the series continued by virtue of its ideas. Its idea would be infinite, so it's just that she reached the physical limit of what can be done with painting itself. So I think just, you know, I think she used painting also as just another sort of way to sort of project her activities as an artist, and she was ceaselessly questioning what she was as an artist, what is an artistic life, or, you know, it was very, very restless person, yet she could settle down and you know, paint paintings with great intent and intensity, and that didn't seem to her to kind of like, it was not a disavowal of her rather status.
It's interesting to me to think about the artists that she interacted with when she was in New York in that time and working, before she stopped working, while she was still painting. And they're mostly, they're mostly men. They're mostly sculptors and people doing things with language. You know, Richard Serra, Carl Andre, Dan Graham, and so on. I feel like there's something very sculptural about, if you think about it, from the tools, which are the actual implements that the sculptors use, hammers, things like that, and drills and so on. And she's representing them, and then she goes beyond that to representing things like cones and various forms, and it's a very sculptural. Even when you look at the surfaces of them, and you realize it's a kind of raking of, and she's not really interested in tactility or texture. Becomes in a sense. I made a note about that, something from 1965, when Jill Johnson talked about the ridge and groove surface. That's called ridge and groove surface, the painting, the furrowed surface. It relates to this idea of tools, metals, hard things,
It feels almost like I feel like the paint almost made with like the brush is like a group of styluses or something,
like a ring.
Like it's sort of everything is about hardness.
It's another aspect of the work which people talk about, which is that it's so masculine. Again, when I talk about the artist she's engaged with.
I never knew that. But there's masculine painting and feminine painting.
Well, there's paintings of drills and screws.
Yeah, but men painted women, and that wasn't like feminine painting,
No, but what I mean is that she as a person I'm not saying women's art looks like that. I'm saying Lee Lozano's art looks like it has a kind of toughness, and it's violent, and it's, and her whole identification is male. And some of the drawings, the way that she's writing, it's a man's voice. It's a man's voice.
But isn't that like the symptom of its time or of its?
I think it's a symptom of her.
It's also a symptom of a lot of lady artists. That they cannot tolerate the lady artists.
Yeah.
It's like a self-hazing also, of course. You see it in artists today as well. You see it all the time. I think this kind of, and then pushing against, like rejecting in a way the insignias of what female could mean by overcompensating it to this other, over-aggressive, evacuated. I think it's much more, it's a problem of not dealing with any kind of emotional material in herself. It's like the work is extremely non-sensual. It's so hard, it's like really rough sex. It's like, it's like all the time, really, it's brutal, it's very hard and it's super desperate, I think. There's this unbelievable force in this thing.
Yeah, it's got a lot of cheek, and humor. I feel like I don't really see this sort of like. I see this paint like she's playing with us, she's playing with herself, and like so much of the other work is full of cheek humor. I don't see why suddenly abstraction where we can't let in that part. That's a pencil. I'm sorry, it's a pencil. But it's not. It's also an abstract painting, and it's like it's a very large thing. But it's like someone sitting there making a drawing. She's making a painting for someone making a drawing, and I think this is all very conscious. And yet, about the emotional dimension, I don't think it was her failure to deal with her emotions. So it may have been, but it also was very much like in the conventions at the time to sort of banish those aspects from art. And there was very much about her that was solidly interested in the mainstream. I think these paintings, for all of their sort of radicality, are also dealing very directly with very mainstream things in American painting, like mass. So, post-war painting is just much more about mass, and it's about it's distinctly American. So, I don't know. I choose to interpret that she's very conscious of these things, but there's so much that's missing from her notes and writings about her life. For instance, you see allusions to maybe the reality she was living daily as a woman artist in the 1960s, but nowhere is there any kind of complaining or mention of discrimination against her. And maybe in a drawing over here will be this sort of sarcastic aside about something some guy said to her, sex or something that comes across. Do you understand?
There's another quote of hers that I think is important and really central to how she saw what she was doing. And she said, one thing I always liked was the idea of energy that is not contained by the edges of the canvas. And, you know, you brought up the wave paintings, and I know your practice, Yuta, and I think there's, you know, today it's very easy that people refer to a kind of performative aspect of art. I think it's, I think there's not a lot behind it. But with Lozano, she was really interested in this very physical, very durational engagement with what she was doing. You know, the last wave painting she worked on continuously for 52 hours. And that's not taking a nap and going, you know, that's being up for over 2 straight days to finish a painting. And that's the end, because it's not possible. You know, the next painting would have been an even greater engagement of just time and energy. There's no chance.
When I understand, she couldn't physically fit any more waves into the space. I mean, and I guess it was part of the work that each painting is the same exact side performance.
And I wonder if that's something, that kind of engagement with like sort of performance, that not just the performance like I'm making this painting, but that the painting itself has to perform. And that also relates to why painting isn't just this kind of, you know, passé or obsolete thing, that it has a potential to be put out in public and have some kind of function.
Yeah, but the more obsessive you become about your painting in the studio performance, which is a performance, I mean, you know, the less you sort of have to deal with the other performance, which is the rest of all the stuff you do as an artist, you know. I mean, there is a social performance all the time, and I think Lozano was very aware of that too. But there was absolutely, this is a different era. This is the 60s. This is not the 90s. It's where when we had a conversation about Lozano and her like conceptual pieces and her studio pieces. And it's not now, it was not like it is today, where everything is basically informed by social performance all the time, at any moment, even when you sleep. So I think she did not want to reconcile these. I mean, there's the extreme studio performance, and then there is the other social performance that also is pushed to an extreme, because I guess I don't know why this is like this, but this is maybe because of her personality, or that's her contribution to keep these things apart, to not mix them up, or maybe it's she couldn't, or whatever, but they distinctively almost like running against each other, or like they're two things that can mix, and that's in a way interesting also, that it has very sharp edges, so to speak. There is no, in a way, the paradigm of endless communication and endless negotiation and endless exchanges, it hasn't really settled in at that point, not yet to a degree as we do it today. So it's very, for us it's of course very hard now to, when we use the term performance or performances or performative aspects of painting and try to conceptualize this, it's a very, you know, it's very complicated to use it in the same way as people in the 60s might have thought, you know, so it gets a bit messy. But I think in her, when we look at the work today and look, that it seems that there was a really, she recognized this as a super problematic terrain, and there was this extreme performance type things in the studio, and there were these other also pushed to an extreme performance pieces that were social performance pieces. I mean, that's how I see it, and whatever, can we learn something from this, can we examine it, can we, I don't know, recognize her suffering, or I don't know what it, you know, what to do with it today. It's complicated. It is a problem, and I think that is also interesting, because she still poses that problem.
Well, I think you have to put it in the context of the time also, the emancipatory politics of the 60s, which are pretty, don't exist now, and the way things were defined in sort of camps in the art world, or how they were defined according to, you know, the radical politics.
The sense of it is, she said, something like, I'm not angry, but I feel rage. And my thought is, I would rather deal with someone who's angry, because it's probably a passing thing. And then rage is something like a very intense emotion, which probably, you know, was there all the way through. When people look at things like the Tool paintings, they might get this sense of a kind of hitting, a kind of violence, all that. And then when you get to these paintings, you might, you know, that somehow this person passed through it all. But I don't think she did. I think these have a certain appearance, but it's still the same. It's the same person who made them. It's not like a different person came somehow with it, because these also follow just a few years after that work, and that work follows just a few years after all the drawings where there's a lot of language, and she's very, really aggressive and very sexual. But again, I did want to, you know, bring up the fact that we probably would speak a lot about her, almost to some kind of exclusion of talking about the paintings. But I don't think that that's
No,
even
but I
the
don't
real
think we have
conversation.
excluded that, because I pointed it out different times, like the underlying, what you call rage, I wouldn't call it rage, maybe I call it
She
more
called it
force,
rage.
what she called it rage, is visible. It's clearly visible
Yeah.
and on the surface, in the tightness, in the kind of pressure, in the more drawing time, like other work that is not on display.
I would even say-
So I do think it's completely visible, and we're not kind of leaving that on the side, and it's not like, oh, the acts of her conceptual pieces are more rage than the others. It's distributed in all the fields, and I think that is also the interesting part, you know, that they kind of in a way seem to fuel each other.
I see it as a kind of form of self-rule, you know, the way, you know, the way she made conceptual art, the way she made painting, it's like, you know, you sense her trying to bottle the rage or whatever, you know. But that's what makes it all good and different from a lot of conceptual art of the era.
Well, I think self-rule is a good way of saying it, because, you know, she did a piece called Take Possession. And I forget which artist she was speaking to, and he was uncomfortable with it, and she said something like, we're all possessed, but of course to maybe a stronger degree. But just picking up what you were saying a minute ago, that these things, these emotions and so on, are visible, I would say, and again, speaking about paintings as paintings, it's even visible chromatically, because it's a very particular palette. You know, when you get something that looks like a bright color, it's basically rust, this painting there. But I'm not sure where this came from, but I made a quick note before, as I was reading some of her notes in this catalog, and I thought, you know, nobody really would think about Lozano in these paintings as in relation to the light and space arts. Everyone thinks of all these sort of plastics in California and everything, you know. But I think it is dealing with light and space, but she's like the light and space artist of darkness, you know. There's something definitely, there's an undertone.
It's also kind of a terror feeling of the painting. I feel like they're buried in terror, like a terrament, you know, like they're buried alive or something, and they're so claustrophobic. You know, there's no air in them. There's light and space of objects, but there's no figure grounding. Like every part is object or suffocating.
And things collide. I mean, some of them don't make sense if you think about, you know, if you really want to think figure and ground, like how does something pass through 3 different panels, but also 3 different spaces, and still maintain a kind of object that's coherent across all.
Puzzle, and they're all sort of puzzle. The same form business here, and we're all painting that does that really good. think, you know, this is something that is a sort of, like, I think painters have a kind of sensibilities, you know. I don't think of this as style, I think it's a sensibility. It's just something that she wants to see in the painting. She figures out a way to make it apparent, but, you know, it's very much the same feeling in all the paintings. You wouldn't call it formal painting.
I've seen one or two people sneak out, so I think that's my cue to open it up in case anybody would like to ask some questions or raise a point. Sorry?
When did you make these?
64 to 67? I think. 64 to 67.
No, I think these are a little like 67, 68.
The wave series is 67 to 70. That's what I latter late 60s.
Any questions or anybody have any disputes or grievances? Nobody? Yes.
What do you think it is about her that has made her work suddenly so relevant? I mean, people weren't paying this much attention to her back in 1967 or 1980. Why is it that suddenly people have caught up?
I don't think it's suddenly relevant because, you know, she left New York, she stopped working, there were no galleries actively working for her in her absence. It's a pre-internet era, so that's what we call the black hole of opportunity and so on, which, you know, was good again. And then slowly there were shows and retrospectives and publication, you know, it's the usual process. The thing with Lozano is, in an emblematic way, I would say, is that as she's rediscovered, it really kind of ushers in that whole period when curators, now lots of people wanted to go and see, oh, who was forgotten or who can we bring back, you know, and that even became a kind of industry, you could say, who are the forgotten artists we can bring back, you know.
And David Reed points out in his interview with Katie Siegel also that it was like everybody had started as a painter, but a lot of painters were turning to sculpture, and so they naturally wanted to sort of promote that, you know. And then there were other people who just saw all painting as conservative, and so there was sort of cutoff in interest of painting. Actually, it was really mostly women who were sort of pushing painting for ordinary houses in the room, for instance. You know, a lot like Dorothy Rocker and people like that, Lee. And then unfortunately, this history sort of got lost because the dominant discourse became about sculpture and other forms that were considered more advanced. Painting was just labeled as this old-fashioned.
I would say too, it's a matter of there's a delay in what you go back for. So, for example, in the late 80s into the 90s, people were interested in the 60s and 70s, what had happened just before. It's the way people create their own view back to history, and it's the way that like young people today now seem to be interested in the 90s. So I think it was just a certain kind of timing that made it right.
Yeah, but the question is always, I think it's a very good question, because, you know, whatever drives us to this each generation, or it's not even generational at this point, it's sort of almost like an industry of rediscoveries. So each rediscovery has its own agenda and has its own purposes. So, you know, you could also say, well, why wasn't she just rediscovered like together with other minimalists, you know, because it wasn't workable, because somehow there was not enough work, it was too, whatever, difficult again, and too incoherent, or she couldn't be rediscovered as performance artist.
She's not really
because she's
any
not,
of those things.
So that's what I mean. That's it's not even that's why I feel it's an interesting position that even defines today this kind of rediscovery imperative that everybody is like, you know, even the last forgotten whatever artist is being scraped off the bottom of some whatever, you know.
That's just not true.
No, but it is true insofar that there is an industry producing these needs to feed the need all the time.
It seems like artists are constantly kind of like saying things that are kind of going to put people on course.
But he didn't say.
It's a different kind of underground, perhaps, but you know, Warhol is self-portrait where he's
He was not to say that.
ever. I always understood that he's
Well, between Lozano and Sean, I would say what keeps me from being invited off into art schools, which I think is a good thing to put out in conclusion. You think about the artists who drop out or stop, and I always say, it's always the wrong artists. Thanks, Barbara. Thanks to the gallery.
Okay, well, they're closing down the gallery, and you can probably hear them folding up the chairs in the background, so we're just going to make a quick run through. This piece is titled Creme, 1965, and it's oil on canvas, 87 by 77 inches. Okay, I think maybe the main attraction to this show are the drawings, and I'm not going to take time to give you the titles. We'll just run along and take some quick views of this. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the career, the legend, the myth of Lee Lozano, but this is a lady that came to New York as a young artist, I guess maybe in the early 60s. Oh, I like this one. Got some notes in there. And she was very ambitious. I think she'd been married, but divorced from her husband, I guess, and moved from Chicago. That's nice. Anyway, she ended up in New York, and over the decade of the 1960s, she went from the abstract expressionists to the pop artists and was part of the Warhol crowd, then to the minimalists, became friends with people like Carl Andre Don Judd. She had a loft on Grand Street. And then at some point, I think maybe she got involved with the Conceptualists and may have also started to suffer from some kind of psychological problems. Most of these drawings are from 1964, 65, and that can't be more than about 2.5 inches square. Well, we'll run around and look at some of the paintings. This is titled Slide. (1965) oil on canvas, 3 panels. This is 72 1/8 by 168 inches. And, well, so a lot of these paintings were actually stored in a barn in Pennsylvania for about 30 years. And actually, I'm surprised there's a certain amount of crackle, but they look like they've held up pretty well. And I think this one is called Swamp. 1966, oil on canvas, 2 panels. 78 1/4 by 160. And, Well, these are big pieces, and one of the things that they were discussing tonight is where this particular body of work fits in as it relates to minimalism and maybe even conceptualism, performance. So if we can get some idea of the texture. She's got a very nice feel for the paint with the kind of raked or combed surfaces against a very kind of drier, or sometimes it's just a matter of the angle at which the raking takes place causes a different kind of reflection. This is titled Pinch. 1964, oil on canvas, 78 1/8 by 78 1/8. And as you can see, all of these have very limited palettes. And yeah, the crackle is an interesting feature. Well, we'll wrap up on this piece. It's titled Lean. Oil on canvas, 3 panels, 78 by 123, and this is a little nicer with the nice browns, and I think that's Indian red. Also, I like this kind of the way that they've got the diagonal panels here fitted together. That was nice. Well, so this has been Lozano drawings and paintings from the 60s. Thank you, Kate.